Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen a total of 11 articles which are relevant for our prelims and mains exam. So we do have a number of topics in today's newspaper which are very important. So stay with me for the next 1 hour, 10 minutes so that we can comprehensively cover all these topics. And this will ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from this initiative, do support us with your likes and comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now before we start, we have an important announcement. On the 10th of December, at 7 p.m., Unacademy would be marking its 9th anniversary. So Unacademy would be hosting a mega event, Unacademy Pratishtha, and I urge all of you to attend this event as it is an online event. All you have to do is subscribe to UPSC Unstoppables YouTube channel by Unacademy and set a reminder by clicking on the live stream which is available on this channel. The link is provided in the video description as well. And also please note that Unacademy IAS English has launched 2-year and 3-year courses for those aspirants who are preparing for 2026 and 2027. These classes are available at the best possible prices. And if you apply the code IAS English, you stand to get a further discount on these prices. So this will give you access to all the classes by our top educators, along with one-on-one mentorship, prelims and mains test series, and as well as the required study material. So if you're interested, enroll by using the link provided in the description and use the code for further discount on this price. So with this, let's get started with today's discussion. On page number 1, 8 and 13, we have a set of articles related to the decision that was taken by the Monetary Policy Committee to retain the repo rate at 6.5%. The Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI, which conducts a bi-monthly periodic review, it has determined that there is no need to alter the repo rate as of now. And it is of the opinion that there is a good balance between growth and inflation. And it has adopted a neutral stance, neither favoring growth entirely nor favoring inflation control entirely. And it has decided to retain the repo rate at 6.5%. However, the other key policy rate, the CRR, cash reserve ratio, has been reduced by 50 basis points. And it has come down to 4%. So this is a big development. So let's understand what is the Monetary Policy Committee? What is its role and function? Let's understand these policy rates, repo rate and CRR. And let's carry out a detailed analysis of the status of the Indian economy and what has necessitated a reduction in CRR and why repo rate has been retained at 6.5%. So we have an editorial as well based on this, and RBI governor has also given a detailed analysis of the final decisions that were approved by the Monetary Policy Committee. So first, let's talk about the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee of RBI. See, the Reserve Bank of India, the central bank, is primarily responsible for the monetary policy of the country. This essentially mandates the RBI to manage the liquidity in the economy. When you have more liquidity, it can favor growth, but excess liquidity can also lead to inflation. So to contain inflation, one basic strategy used by RBI is to suck out the excess liquidity, to absorb the excess liquidity. So managing this monetary policy and striking a balance between promoting growth and controlling inflation is one of the primary mandates of the RBI. Until 2016, the RBI was handling the monetary policy entirely on its own. and this often led to a conflict between the RBI and the government of India. Generally, the government and the finance ministry would push for pro-growth monetary policy, which meant that government would put pressure on the RBI, which was seen as an attack on the independence of the RBI, the autonomy of the RBI. On the other hand, RBI would generally be very cautious and conservative when it comes to inflation, as it can hurt the common man. And the rates would be such that the policy would be pro-inflation control, which could compromise growth, which was a genuine concern of the government and the finance ministry as well. So this often led to a tussle between the government and the RBI. So to ensure that the monetary policy is more stable and well handled and balanced between growth and inflation control, in 2016, the government established the Monetary Policy Committee. The RBI Act was amended through the Finance Act of 2016, and it provided for the establishment of the Monetary Policy Committee. Now, if you look at the composition of this committee, you'll understand how it strikes a balance when it comes to the monetary policy of India. The Monetary Policy Committee consists of a total of 6 members. The RBI governor as the chairperson, along with RBI's deputy governor who handles monetary policy, and one another official from the RBI board. So essentially, 3 officials from RBI. But it also brought in 3 outside experts, neutral experts from the outside, who would be appointed by the government of India. So this would give the government as well a say in the monetary policy of the country and still ensure and retain the autonomy and independence of RBI and its primary role in managing the monetary policy of the country. So decisions with the Monetary Policy Committee is taken on the basis of majority. And if at all there is a tie, because there are 6 members, the final vote, the tiebreaker, goes for the RBI governor. Obviously, as the chairperson of the Monetary Policy Committee, the RBI governor will exercise the tiebreaker vote. Now, please understand that under the law, the Monetary Policy Committee has been given a flexible inflation target to ensure that a healthy inflation is maintained, because a certain amount of inflation is always good for the economy to drive investments and to drive demand and consumption. So this amendment introduced the inflation target, which is supposed to be maintained by the Monetary Policy Committee. And the target is 4% inflation in the economy with a range of plus or minus 2%. This is considered as the acceptable limit of inflation, from 2% to 6% essentially, with an ideal target of 4%. So this is exactly what the Monetary Policy Committee strives to achieve, to maintain inflation between 2 to 6% and ensure that it is brought down to 4% and maintained at that ideal level. Now, to ensure that the inflation is under check while promoting growth, RBI has a set of monetary policy tools at its disposal. There are various rates which are determined by the Monetary Policy Committee, and this plays a role in managing liquidity levels, which can either support growth or help control inflation. As I said, excess liquidity will always help in boosting growth. When there is cheaper money in the market, it becomes easier for banks to give out loans and for investors and individuals to borrow loans and invest that back in the economy. So that will drive up growth and consumption. At the same time, any excess liquidity leads to inflation. So by using these key policy rates, RBI will try to suck out the excess liquidity in order to control inflation. But as you can see, both are contradictory. So any attempt just to control inflation could compromise growth because it could reduce the liquidity available in the market. Similarly, any blind focus on growth promotion, which induces a lot of liquidity into the economy, could end up increasing demand, and if the supply side doesn't match up, it could lead to severe inflationary tendencies in the economy. So this is the task of the Monetary Policy Committee, to strike that delicate balance between promoting growth while maintaining inflation control within the given target range. So the primary policy rate, the benchmark policy rate of RBI is the repo rate. Repo rate is basically the rate at which RBI lends money to the commercial banks. Or to put it in another way, it is the rate at which commercial banks borrow from the RBI. So this is known as the repo rate, the benchmark policy rate, the key policy rate, which helps in controlling liquidity. And that is what is leveraged by the Monetary Policy Committee. Now, as I said, repo rate has been retained at 6.5%. And I'll explain why. We'll come to that. The other policy rate which has been employed this time is the CRR, the cash reserve ratio, which has been reduced by 50 basis points and brought down to 4%. So what is CRR? I'm covering these basic facts and concepts as well before we analyze the developments, so that even if there is a prelims question related to this, you guys should be able to answer that. CRR is essentially the percentage of cash required to be kept in reserves by the commercial banks as against the total bank deposits. So banks are expected to hold a certain minimum amount of their deposit as reserves with the central bank, with the RBI. They need to deposit a percentage of their total deposits and keep that minimum cash with the RBI as a reserve. So this is the CRR, the cash reserve ratio. Now let us see how RBI manages this complex task of balancing growth while controlling inflation. So as we discussed, now let's say the RBI has to bring in inflation control. Let's say inflation is going out of control, moving out of the range. Obviously, this will severely affect the common people. So RBI will try to suck out the liquidity, and the best way to do that is to increase the repo rate, because this increases the borrowing cost for the commercial banks, which means commercial banks eventually will not have sufficient money to give out fresh loans to investors and retail customers. So that in a way helps in containing the demand. So this will of course take some time to trickle down and have an impact, but it is a very effective tool for liquidity management. Similarly, if RBI wants to favor growth, it will do the opposite. It will cut the repo rate. By cutting repo rate, it is encouraging the commercial banks to borrow more from the RBI because interest rates are cheaper, and this brings in more liquidity and banks become more flexible to give out loans at lower rates, which will encourage investors and customers to take more loans. So this is essentially how inflation management is done, and parallelly, the focus on growth is maintained. So it's not essentially a zero-sum game. It's not that we should always promote growth and compromise inflation targets or the other way around. It depends on the macroeconomic factors. So that is why Monetary Policy Committee keeps on conducting periodic reviews. It looks at key indicators. It looks at the inflation level, the GDP numbers, the manufacturing output, looks at all these key indicators and then takes a calibrated decision. So now RBI has retained repo rate at 6.5% because inflation in recent months has increased quite significantly. Especially in October, the October month inflation data has shown that inflation has spiked to 6.2%, primarily driven by food prices. In the months of September and October, food prices have surged significantly across India, which has been hurting the common man, primarily due to weather-linked events, due to disasters, floods, and in some places lack of monsoon rainfall. It has essentially disrupted the food supply chain, and it has led to a shortage of few essential food commodities. So this significant surge in food prices has added pressure, inflationary pressure, and you can see that inflation has touched 6.2%, which happens to be a 14-month high. So obviously RBI would immediately focus on bringing down the inflation level, because data shows that it has gone beyond the target which has been given to the RBI. It has crossed the flexible range which has been set for the Monetary Policy Committee. But one was expecting that RBI would favor growth as well, because recent data has shown that the growth in second quarter of this fiscal year has come down to 5.4% against an estimated 7%. This is a 7-quarter low as far as GDP growth is concerned. So primarily there has been a fall in demand and consumption, and this is taking a direct toll on GDP numbers. So this is almost like a nightmare scenario for the economy in a way. Low growth, high inflation. It represents a very dangerous situation, right? Almost leading towards a stagflation. So one was expecting that RBI might favor growth, because in a long time, GDP numbers had dropped significantly to 5.4%. And most estimates have revised their GDP estimation for the Indian economy. So given this recent development, one was expecting that RBI might favor growth and it may reduce a repo rate. But it hasn't done that, because inflation level, which has touched 6.2% last month in October, essentially, it has not allowed the RBI to cut the repo rate. So it has maintained a neutral stance. The RBI is still hopeful that inflation will come under control in the second half of the year, when fresh harvest will come in. It is also hopeful that growth will revive and pick up in the next 2 quarters of this fiscal, because that is the festive season. So based on this expectation that inflation will come under control and growth will see a pickup, it has maintained a neutral stance, and hence it has not increased or decreased the repo rate. So I hope this is clear. But however, the RBI has revised its GDP and inflation estimates. RBI had estimated that Indian economy might grow at 7.2% in this fiscal year. But now this has been revised to 6.6%, which clearly indicates that there is a clear downward trend in the Indian economy. There is a clear fall in investments, which is a result of low demand, low consumption. Especially in urban India, we have seen a significant drop in consumption levels. People are not buying essential products and even other luxury items, right? From cars to phones to jewelry, and even FMCG and even recreation industry has seen a significant drop in consumption levels. The demand has dropped. So when that happens, obviously, the private industry will hold back on investments as well, because they're expecting a downturn in the economy. So the RBI, along with many other organizations and institutions, which also have anticipated a slowdown in growth, RBI has revised the estimates from 7.2 to 6.6%. Now, this is with regard to the GDP numbers. Now, if you look at inflation, RBI had earlier estimated that inflation might be at 4.5%, which is still well within the range and very close to the ideal target of 4%. But now that inflation has surged in September and October, inflation also has been revised to 4.8%. So there is an upward revision in inflation estimates and a downward revision in GDP growth estimates. So definitely it points towards the risk that lies ahead for the Indian economy. It's not an alarming situation, but definitely it points out that inflation is being very hard to tackle and bring down to ideal levels. And at the same time, it shows that there is a slowdown which is happening. And in a way, both are interconnected. And that is exactly what RBI governor talks about as well in this detailed speech that he provided. The Hindu provides an analysis of the speech of the RBI governor. The governor pointed out that eventually inflation does impact growth. Unless and until we bring inflation under control, right, it will affect the growth parameters as well. How? Because when inflation remains high, as we saw in October, if inflation was at 6.2%, which is above the target given to the Monetary Policy Committee, This obviously will reduce consumption. Right? Now you tell me in the comments, when prices increase of most items, do you go and buy more or buy less? Obviously you'll buy less. Consumption will go down because things have become more expensive. So as consumption reduces, obviously you see a drop in demand. So as consumption and demand drops, naturally investments will be put on hold by the private investors. They will hold back the investments. So you will see an impact on growth. So if you want sustainable growth, then inflation should be under check. That is the key point you need to understand. If you blindly try to promote growth, it will lead to runaway inflation eventually, right? And such high levels of inflation is actually counterproductive to growth. Eventually, it will affect consumption and demand, and it will lead to slowdown in investments, and it will compromise growth. So if you want long-term sustainable growth, inflation has to be under control. It has to be under check. Only then we can focus on boosting growth. That is the reason why the Monetary Policy Committee has adopted a neutral stance. But however, the RBI and the Monetary Policy Committee anticipate a liquidity crunch. They are anticipating a liquidity crunch. So if repo rate is not altered, it will not ease the liquidity situation. So that is why RBI has decided to employ another monetary policy tool, the CRR, and it has reduced it by 50 basis points to 4%, so that this will release some additional liquidity into the market. So now commercial banks will have more flexibility as they can pull out some of their cash reserves, which they have deposited with the central bank, because it has come down from 4.5 to 4%. So this can help address the liquidity crunch. So that is why RBI has leveraged the other monetary policy tool, the CRR, and it has kept the repo rate untouched for now at 6.5%. So the editorial praises this balanced approach of Monetary Policy Committee. It shows the nuanced approach, because see, from the government there was a lot of pressure on the Monetary Policy Committee, because obviously when growth dropped to 5.4% in the second quarter, because estimation was 7% and above, but it dropped to a 7-quarter low of 5.4%, which will raise questions about government's policies, right? It could lead to criticism against the government, and eventually it will have an electoral impact. So whenever growth falls, there will be government pressure on Monetary Policy Committee to drop the repo rate so that growth can be promoted. And this time we saw that again, where government leaders, they indicated that they're expecting a reduction in repo rate from Monetary Policy Committee. Now, despite this pressure, Monetary Policy Committee has decided against it. It has shown a neutral stance because inflation also remains higher. It is slightly at uncomfortable levels, at least for a short period of time. So to address this volatility and bring inflation under control, the RBI has decided, the Monetary Policy Committee has decided to retain the repo rate, whereas it has employed CRR to bring in some additional liquidity. So I hope this clears the entire concept, and you can anticipate mains questions based on this. Examine the delicate balance between growth and inflation and how RBI manages the challenging mandate that it has been given with. So now that I've covered all the basic facts and concepts with the recent developments, I think it should be easy for you to write an answer to this question. So just rely on the flow, the structure that I followed in my discussion, and one should be able to build upon that and write a good answer. So let's see how many of you can do this. Next, let's look at this interesting article from page number 8. This column examines the colonial handling of the Bombay Plague of 1896. Some of you would have heard about the Bombay Plague of 1896, a deadly epidemic which had a huge impact on India and even around the world. So the Bombay Plague caused massive devastation, especially from 1896 to 1899. It entered India primarily through the East Asian trade routes, primarily from the East Asian trade routes, it is believed that plague entered the Indian subcontinent and eventually caused massive destruction to the population. Hundreds of thousands of deaths were reported. And across the country, plague became a deadly, contagious epidemic. So, how did the British government deal with this? And are there any lessons for epidemic, pandemic management in today's world? That is what the article is exploring. So, as the plague was causing massive destruction and devastation to the Indian people, to the economy as well, the British authorities, they adopted very controversial methods to control the spread of the disease. They established a plague commission. The Indian Plague Commission was established in the year 1898, which was headed by T.R. Fraser. A British official was asked to head the Indian Plague Commission to study the sources of transmission and come out with containment strategies. Now, many of you would have better knowledge of this and experience as well, because recently the world has gone through a pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So at least you're familiar with the standard protocols in epidemiological control. You need to understand the spread of the disease, where outbreaks are happening. You need to come out with quarantine protocols and treatment protocols, right? You should think about containment strategies, work with the patients, the local communities, right? And you need to step up the capacity, the infrastructure of your healthcare system. So there are multiple challenges that the healthcare sector will face. So this is a governance problem, right? So if you look at how the British handled this, especially the Indian Plague Commission, there were some disturbing methods that were employed by the British. For example, the Indian Plague Commission brought out voluminous reports based on the studies that it was carrying out. It brought out these maps. It carried out extensive mapping of the outbreaks. But however, the problem was the mapping and the surveillance of the spread of the disease was largely used for control. It was not really targeted towards containment of the spread of the disease. And it never gave a role for the people of the community. Rather, the community was seen as a target. And in fact, the British employed policing and even military methods to enforce very strict quarantine containment. And it appeared as if the government was targeting the people. Instead of being empathetic, instead of working with the people and the community, the British employed the mapping and surveillance and the data that was brought out through such exercises for excessive policing and control of the subjects. And that was their flawed approach towards epidemic management. They created maps not based on where the main outbreaks are concentrated, not based on the patients or with concern regarding their health or treatment. They were mainly obsessed about the next outbreak. Where will the next outbreak happen? They hardly bothered about those who were already infected. Even though there were few hot spots where the disease was rapidly spreading, the Plague Commission did not give the required priority to understand the current existing outbreaks. There was no focus on handling the current patients, treating them, or containing the spread. So there was absolute misgovernance in a way. And in fact, they entirely obsessed with where the next one might happen, where the next outbreak might happen. So this led the British authorities to focus on controlling the pandemic, and they relied on methods like heavy policing, excessive surveillance, and even brought in the military when necessary to contain the spread. For example, based on these controversial maps that were created by the Indian Plague Commission, police officers would be deployed at railway stations, at important checkpoints, at entry points to cities and villages to closely observe everyone who was coming in and going out and keep a tab on them and maintain surveillance on them. at hospitals, military orderlies were deployed to strictly enforce the protocols and quarantine measures. So this was a authoritarian approach that the British employed. By using the data from mapping and surveillance, they used it mainly to maintain control over the subjects instead of showing empathy towards them, instead of focusing on their recovery. The focus was on containing the current patients and preventing the next outbreak. This was a completely flawed approach, and it in a way enabled the excessive policing, excessive surveillance. And as you can see, the entire focus was on control. The entire focus was on ensuring that the subjects are placed under control of the authorities. Now, the worst part is that some of these practices continue even today. Now, for example, if you guys remember COVID-19, especially when initially, in the initial days, there was a lot of chaos, panic, misinformation as well, because many of them were not aware of what epidemics, pandemics are, or what would be the impact, how to deal with them, right? We weren't aware of, let's say, basic sanitation measures or social distancing or lockdowns. These were unheard of, at least for the present generations. So when the pandemic broke out, just remember the response of the authorities. How did authorities respond? I'm sure all of you remember how our police enforced the lockdowns. You might remember those viral videos where local police would go and beat up people if they found anyone on the street, where they would brutally beat up people, arrest them mindlessly, somehow, as if somehow this would help us overcome the pandemic, right? Yes, people were also not respecting the government orders, but the way in which the police were reacting in several parts of the country, because police also didn't have that awareness. The government, in a way, had inherited some colonial traditions. So once there was a lockdown, the police went on a full rampage in several parts of the country, arresting people, beating up people, which again shows the intent to control the population. Then if you remember how local administration responded, especially the municipal level authorities, city corporations, what did they do? They started branding those houses where cases were detected. You might remember where local officials would storm the house and forcefully take those family members for quarantine. They would even label that house, mark those houses where cases were reported. This would lead to stigmatization. It would isolate those patients and the entire family from the society, from the locality. Such aggressive control-based methods, strict enforcement-based methods were used by our own police and local authorities. Right? And in many ways, people justified it. Many people said, yes, such measures are necessary, because even they themselves didn't have a good understanding of how to deal with epidemics and pandemics. So that is why it is important to draw the right lessons. And the way in which colonial government mishandled the Bombay Plague, it has crucial lessons to offer for epidemic and pandemic management. Now, if you remember, during COVID-19 also, a lot of data was collected. The government came out with digital innovations to enable contact tracing, to enable the vaccination drives that were rolled out later. Right? So a lot of digital data, health data was collected and harvested, quite similar to how the British Plague Commission would also collect a lot of data. But this raises questions of privacy as well, excessive surveillance as well. There were instances where citizens' data was leaked and compromised. The data which was collected as part of the efforts to tackle COVID-19 was eventually leaked, leading to compromise on your right to privacy. So these are the lessons that we need to draw and plug those gaps that still exist. Be it the excessive use of force, the mentality of the authorities to control the population, maintain stringent surveillance. Instead of that, the approach should be more empathetic. The approach should be more inclusive, participative. You need to bring in the local communities. See, today, maybe government may not deploy police and military to keep a check. It largely relies on the healthcare system itself to get the data. while that is a good change, the overall approach still largely remains the same, right? Where there is a panic, there is strict enforcement, control. So that becomes a priority. So instead, the article points out that the government should focus on a more involved approach, a more inclusive, participative approach, where community plays a role, where infected patients are not treated as outcasts, where there is focus on not just preventing the next outbreak, but also on treating the current patients. So that is something that we take away from this important article. So please take up this question. What are the public health lessons that we can draw from the colonial handling of Bombay Plague of 1896? Now let's look at the next big article on the same page. We have an article focused on India's manufacturing sector. I found this article to be very insightful. This article has been brought out primarily because recently the annual survey of industries data was brought out for financial year 2022-23. The annual survey of industries. It's a very important survey that gives us insight about India's manufacturing, about where India's industries stand regarding their contribution to the economy. The annual survey of industries, it collects data from all industries and factories with 10 or more workers which use power and electricity. It also collects data from all those factories with 20 or more workers which do not use electricity. So these are the factories and industries which are the focus of this survey, the annual survey of industries. Now, according to this data from 2022-23, India's manufacturing sector has seen a phenomenal double-digit growth of 21.5%. Manufacturing sector output has seen a double-digit expansion of 21.5%, which is extraordinarily good. The gross value added stands at 7.3%, which is also very significant. So India's manufacturing sector has performed very well in 22-23, and the writer credits the PLI scheme of the Modi government for this performance of the manufacturing sector of India. The writer is none other than the Director General of the CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry. That's why I said his insights are very useful, very relevant. The PLI scheme that basically provides an incentive, a production-linked incentive. It has benefited certain sectors. Sectors like mobile manufacturing, electronics industry, automobiles, textiles, then even pharma industry. These major industries of India have immensely benefited from the PLI scheme, where the government provides a very attractive financial incentive to these sectors based on the production targets being met. So this has considerably increased manufacturing output. It has pushed the companies, the factories to step up their output. It has boosted India's exports, and of course, it has created numerous jobs. So the good performance of the manufacturing sector in 22-23 has been partly credited to the PLI scheme and its success. Now, the writer is trying to find out what else can be done to sustain the momentum in our manufacturing growth and take this forward, so India can emerge as a major global economy and become a developed economy by 2047. So the writer identifies some of the challenges and provides solutions as well. The writer says the PLI scheme should now be expanded. The writer points out that currently labor-intensive industries such as furniture, leather, etc. These critical sectors, even footwear, the apparel industry, even though textiles is covered, apparel should also be covered. If these labor-intensive industries are covered through PLI, it will not only boost our manufacturing output and exports, it will create millions of jobs. The writer also suggests that the government should incentivize the sunrise sectors, the emerging sectors, such as aerospace, space, and as well as MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul. Now that the government has liberalized aerospace, defense, and space sector, we are witnessing a lot of private participation, including foreign investments in these critical sectors. India is emerging as a hub of private space startups or aerospace companies, both in defense and commercial domain. And India plans on becoming a major MRO hub, a hub for maintenance, repair, and overhaul, especially for the aerospace industry. So these sunrise industries, which have tremendous potential, could be further incentivized through PLI scheme. So this is a great suggestion. The writer is not only identifying the potential areas, but also giving a suggestion on how India can capitalize on this. But however, there are concerns as well. When you look at India's manufacturing growth, there is a stark regional imbalance which becomes very, very evident. Now see, there are few states such as Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka and Uttar Pradesh. These states perform way better than the other states. They account for 54% of India's total manufacturing output. Basically, these 5 states, they account for more than half of India's manufacturing output. They account for 55% of employment in the country. So this clearly highlights the regional divide, the regional imbalance. So if the country has to grow and ensure equity, inclusiveness, and ensure that we become a global economy and a developed economy, it is important to address the regional imbalances. The other states, other regions will also have to focus on their own policies. They need to bring about reforms, land reforms, labor reforms, ensure that they provide adequate infrastructure to attract the industries, build better roads, ensure there is power supply, water supply, attract investments through the right policies. So this is a task in front of the state governments and as well as the central government. Address the regional imbalances and drive manufacturing growth in the other states and other regions as well. Then another critical point raised by the writer is the participation of women in the labor force in manufacturing. Recently, the World Bank brought out a report, the South Asia Development Update. Please write this down. South Asia Development Update is a publication of the World Bank. This report pointed out that if women were to increase their participation in the labor force, especially in manufacturing, then India could see a 9% jump in manufacturing output. Our manufacturing output could go up by 9% if there is greater female labor force participation in the manufacturing industries. See, right now, there are many disadvantages for women workers in the industry. For example, the gender disparity, be it with regard to the unequal pay structure or generally how patriarchy ends up discriminating against women, or the security, safety threats they might face at workplace. And also the lack of facilities, the lack of restrooms, the lack of crash facilities, right? The lack of women hostels. These are very crucial to encourage more women to participate in the labor force. So if the government with the industries can create these facilities for women, ensure their safety, their security, provide them equal opportunities and equal pay, right? Then you will see a significant jump in the participation of women in the labor force, which can boost our manufacturing output by 9%. So these are some very important suggestions that you can actually use in your answers. That's why I've taken my time to explain this article. We could have easily completed this in a much shorter time, but since the points being raised were very critical, writer was identifying the problems and providing solutions. So when there is a question based on this, you have a ready answer here. This article alone will provide a ready answer for any question on manufacturing. Clear? So this completes my discussion of all the big articles. Now let's proceed towards the prelim section and let's take a quick look at the smaller articles because we have a number of prelims related articles today. On page number 6, we have an article related to disaster management. The Ministry of Home Affairs, which is the nodal ministry to handle disaster management, it has approved the release of additional funds from the NDRF to SDRF. So let's understand this quickly. Tamil Nadu was recently hit by a devastating cyclone Fengal. It caused extensive damage in Puducherry and Tamil Nadu requested for more funds as it had run out of the funds under SDRF. Given the extent of the damage, Tamil Nadu raised a demand with the centre. Now, this is an opportunity for us to understand disaster financing in the country. What mechanisms do we have when it comes to disaster finance? See, with regard to disaster management, obviously, it's the Disaster Management Act of 2005 that lays down the legal provisions and provides for the institutions with regard to disaster management. As per the DM Act, there are two types of funds when it comes to disaster response. Response is limited to emergency relief operations. That is when a disaster is happening or it has just happened, to carry out search and rescue operations, to provide immediate assistance, to give compensation, to give food and medicines and water. That is what you mean by response. So, obviously, this requires a lot of funding to run these response operations, right? So, at the national level, there is a National Disaster Response Fund, and at the state level, there is a State Disaster Response Fund. Now, the centre would have mobilized the required financial resources to the NDRF through budgetary allocation, and based on recommendations of Finance Commission, part of it is provided to the states depending on their vulnerability, depending on the extent of disasters faced by a state and the overall vulnerability of a state. The funds are provided from NDRF to SDRF. So when it comes to disaster management, it is states which have a primary role in disaster response. The centre will act as a supplement. The centre will provide armed forces if necessary. The centre will provide a national disaster response force if necessary. It will provide early warnings and alerts and any other technical assistance needed. But state governments have a primary role under the DM Act to provide for disaster response. So initial funds which are used for response will come from the State Disaster Response Fund. The centre will not give separate funding for each and every disaster. No. So once in a year, there is an allocation made from NDRF to SDRF, and states have to utilize those funds in their SDRF to carry out these emergency response measures. But what if a state is hit by multiple disasters in a year, like Uttarakhand or Kerala or Odisha, and if they run out of those funds or if they fall short? Or what if they have faced an extraordinary disaster where their capacity has been overwhelmed? So in that case, the states have an option. They can raise a demand for additional funds. States can approach the centre asking for more allocation from NDRF to SDRF. So now the centre will decide whether it should approve this demand or not. And there is a process for this which is laid down under the Disaster Management Act. So what is this process? Since Ministry of Home Affairs is the nodal ministry for handling disaster management, and we have a dedicated apex institution, the NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, the MHA will coordinate with NDMA and they will establish an inter-ministerial committee. An inter-ministerial committee comprising of top officials from concerned ministries is constituted, and they will visit the disaster hit state. They will visit the disaster affected state and carry out a ground level survey. They will try to estimate the extent of damage, the losses suffered, the number of deaths and injuries, the loss to infrastructure and economy. They bring out an estimate of these losses and they check whether the state has utilized the funds provided in the SDRF. The state would also have mobilized its own resources into SDRF through its own budgetary allocation, apart from what center has given through NDRF. So the central team, the interministerial committee, they will also check whether the funds have been used, have they been used effectively? Is there a need for additional funds? And based on that, it will pass on a recommendation to the Home Ministry. Now, this recommendation, let's say the committee agrees that yes, additional funds have to be given. Then MHA and NDMA will coordinate with Finance Ministry. Obviously, eventually Finance Ministry has to be roped in. The money comes from eventually the Finance Ministry. So once it is approved by the Finance Ministry as well, and Home Ministry agrees with the recommendations of the Interministerial Committee, then additional funds are released from NDRF. This is done on an exceptional case-to-case basis. So in this case, the center has agreed that Tamil Nadu has suffered a serious disaster. Its financial resources are being overwhelmed. So the Home Ministry has approved 944 crore rupees, which will be released additionally from NDRF to SDRF. So this will aid the response efforts of Tamil Nadu government. Next, on page 7, we have a topic from art and culture. The Hindu carries an image which depicts the Dhimsa folk dance, a tribal dance seen in Andhra Pradesh. So let's understand what is the Dhimsa dance and what points are important for a prelims question. The Dhimsa tribal folk dance primarily originated in Odisha, in the Koraput district. But in neighboring Andhra Pradesh, in the coastal belt of Visakhapatnam, it has become widely popular amongst some of the native communities. It is primarily performed by the Porja caste, especially by women. But even men will participate as well. There is no such restriction. So it's a dance which is marked by both men and women, right? Performed by both men and women. And it is primarily seen in the Araku Valley and the Bora Caves, which are also popular tourist destinations, by the way, near Visakhapatnam. So this is where you find the Dhimsa folk dance, a tribal folk dance, to be widely practiced. Now, please note down some key points about the features of this folk dance. So both men and women can perform this. There is no such restriction. And generally, if you look at the dance form, it involves movement of the hand and the feet. And people who are participating in the dance, they form groups in a circle, right? They form these semicircles or circles, and in groups, they dance together by moving their feet and hand. That is the general movement that you find in this particular art form. Coming to the music, various instruments are used, indigenous instruments. Dappu, which is a type of a drum, a percussion instrument. Tudumu, Mori, Kiridi, Jodu, Komulu. These are the different instruments which are used. So please make a note, UPSC might ask a detailed prelims question based on such topics. And also the attire they wear is very colorful, representing colors of the earth and nature, that is red, green, yellow, etc. And women even wear ornaments. So these are some features, standout features of Dhimsa tribal folk dance. Next, in the upcoming Gaganyaan mission of ISRO, European Space Agency has decided to partner with ISRO to assist ISRO in tracking the entire mission. It will provide ground tracking support for India's first ever human space flight program. As you all know, Gaganyaan is a very ambitious space mission, upcoming space mission, which would be our first crewed mission, right? This would be India's first human space flight. The goal is to basically send in 3 astronauts in a orbital capsule, which will be placed in a low Earth orbit of around 300 to 400 kilometers. And they'll spend at least close to a week conducting various experiments before they return back to Earth. So ISRO is relying on support from several critical foreign partners. So European Space Agency and ISRO have signed an agreement through which the European Space Agency will provide ground tracking support. Through its network of ground tracking stations, the European Space Agency will help ISRO in constantly maintaining communication with the orbital module to receive data, to send instructions, etc. Now, did you know that India already has a global network of tracking stations? So please read about this. That is your assignment for today. Read about the locations where ISRO has set up its own network of tracking stations. There are few countries in our region, right? In these countries, ISRO has set up its own ground network of telemetry and tracking stations. So please find out where are these located and mention that in the comments. Now, ISRO is also depending on other countries. For example, Russia. Russia played a critical role in training the Indian astronauts, the Gaganyatris, who are going to be part of the mission. We are working with United States as well. The US is backing the Gaganyaan mission, the NASA, with American space companies like SpaceX. Very soon they'll be carrying an Indian astronaut. One of the Indian astronauts who has been trained by Russia, right, will fly on a SpaceX mission to the International Space Station, which would make him the second Indian astronaut to reach outer space. We are also working with France. France has been helping India in the field of space medicine, space clothing. Japan is also a partner. Japanese space agency JAXA is also working with ISRO. So these are the foreign partners. And now European Space Agency also is supporting Gaganyaan mission by providing ground tracking support. So please find out where India's tracking stations are located, the telemetry tracking stations, in which countries, in which location, and please mention that in the comments. Next, on the same page, we have an update which could be relevant for anthropology, geography. A study has established, a genetic study, that the Nicobarese, they have an ancestral connection with Austroasiatic population. So it's a key finding. You just have to write down one point which might be relevant for your prelims or even your mains exam. A study conducted by the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, which is a CSIR institute. It has established through genome mapping that the Nicobarese community found in the Nicobar Islands of Andaman Nicobar, right? We know that there are native indigenous communities, very distinct linguistic and cultural and ethnic communities found in Andaman Nicobar. So the Nicobarese are a distinct set of people, right? And studies have shown that they share a ancestral, historical, ancient link with the Austroasiatic population. Now, where do you find the Austroasiatic population? They are found primarily in Southeast Asia and also towards the Australasia region. Towards Australia, Pacific, East Asia, Southeast Asia. This is where Austroasiatic populations are found. Previously, it was estimated that these communities were maybe connected around 11,000 years ago in the Holocene epoch. But this has been disproven. The genetic mapping and the genome studies have established that they essentially have a 5,000-year-old link, after which they separated and moved to different parts of the world. So even their linguistic tradition shows those connections even today. It's not just the genome mapping which establishes the link, even the linguistic links can be found between the Nicobarese languages and Austroasiatic languages that are spoken. So that is a key anthropological finding which could be relevant for our exam. Next, the Indira Gandhi Prize for Peace, Disarmament and Development. A very important award instituted by the Government of India in honor of former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. We give out this award to significant global leaders, and also we use the award in a way to send out a symbolic message to certain focus countries and focus regions. So this year, the Indira Gandhi Prize for Peace, Disarmament and Development has been awarded to the former president of Chile, Michelle Bachelet. She's a well-known figure in global geopolitics. She's known for championing the cause of gender rights, human rights. She was the founding director of UN Women, and she championed the issues of women empowerment at the United Nations. She also headed the UN High Commission for Human Rights. She was the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And later, she went on to become the president of Chile. and even fostered close relations with India. India and Chile have very close ties. And don't forget, Chile is a focus country for us because it is part of the lithium triangle. Along with Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, these three South American countries are blessed with lithium, which is a focus for India right now. And we have stepped up our Latin American diplomacy. So there could be a reason why India has awarded this to the former president of Chile. It's a symbolic message, along with recognizing the efforts of Michelle Bachelet for international affairs. In a way, India is sending out a symbolic message that South America is a focus. Countries like Chile are a focus. Right? We are competing with China for resources and influence. And I think it's in that context that this award becomes important. The jury, which decided upon the award, was headed by former National Security Advisor Shiv Shankar Menon. Is that clear? Now, let's look at the next topic. The government of India has tied up with World Bank, and along with the government of Jammu and Kashmir, they would be developing 4 new tourist destinations to boost tourism. See, J&K is known for its pristine beauty. You already have world-renowned places like Gulmarg, Pahalgam, or even Katra Vaishno Devi Temple, right, which attracts a lot of domestic and even international tourists. But the government is looking to further diversify the tourism industry and promote more tourist locations by creating world-class tourist infrastructure. So World Bank of India will not only partner with the government of India and provide some funds and technical support, but it will actively encourage the center and the J&K administration to develop world-class infrastructure at new places to attract more tourists. J&K has recorded 1.2 million tourists in the first half of 2024, which is quite significant. In fact, Modi government has been pinning its hopes on boosting tourism ever since Article 370 was revoked and the changes were done to J&K. The government always insisted that the revocation of special status will provide for the so-called better integration of J&K into India, which could boost tourism as well. And you can see the efforts being undertaken. This could be an opportunity to promote the handicraft industry, the native handiwork and handicraft industry, which can boost the local economy and create more jobs. So 4 places have been chosen as part of this joint venture. This includes Kokarnag in Anantnag district, Bardari in Riyasi district, Badarwa in Doda district, and Dudhpatri in Budgam district. So just make a note of this. Next, the RBI has launched an AI tool to tackle the problem of mule accounts. Remember, we have studied mule accounts in several classes. In previous sessions of Hindu analysis, I've explained repeatedly what are mule accounts. Mule accounts are increasingly used by cyber criminals, digital fraudsters, primarily to carry out these fraudulent transactions. For example, in these digital arrest scams which are happening, right? The fraudsters will use these accounts that belong to someone else, a third party, to move the money out of the country in order to avoid any detection and to avoid leaving behind a trail of evidence. What the cyber criminals and fraudsters do is they will incentivize a few people to give up their bank accounts. Let's say a normal person, a common man, has opened a bank account with their documents, but they're not using that bank account much. So someone will contact them, they'll tell them that I'll give you 20,000, 50,000 rupees if you allow me to use your account for one transaction. So people who get excited by this, they allow their accounts to be used by someone else. They don't know that these are fraudsters and criminals, or in some cases they know and still they rent out their accounts. So this is also referred to as renting of a bank account. People willingly give up their bank account, give it to someone else, give the access to someone else so they can carry out their transactions. So this is called muling or mule accounts, right? They become the carriers essentially. They are carrying the money of someone else, quite often criminals and fraudsters. And people are willingly giving up their accounts and renting them out, or in some cases they are being tricked and duped. So to tackle the menace of mule accounts, which is enabling cyber crimes, digital frauds, and even money laundering, the RBI has developed a artificial intelligence machine learning based tool known as MuleHunter. MuleHunter AITM. UPSC might ask you. So it's an indigenously developed AI ML tool to look at all the bank accounts, the transactions in the country, the databases of all the commercial banks, and automatically flag any suspicious transaction which might be linked with these mule accounts, so that the authorities can suspend these accounts and launch investigations. So those who own these accounts, those who have rented out their accounts to these criminals, will also be punished and prosecuted. So that is why MuleHunter could be a pivotal tool against cyber crimes and digital frauds. So this has been developed by Reserve Bank's Innovation Hub, which is headquartered in Bengaluru. This will be part of India's public infrastructure, digital public infrastructure. So RBI has its own research and development unit, the Reserve Bank Innovation Hub, based out of Bengaluru, which has indigenously developed this AI tool to track down mule accounts and to ensure that we take down these mule accounts. Next, we have an article on page 14 where Russia's foreign minister has pointed out to Western countries that Russia will take any measure necessary to protect itself. Because recently, US has allowed Ukraine to use long-range missiles, such as the ATACMS or ATACMS. And Ukraine even started firing them. It has recently fired these long-range missiles given by US, targeting critical locations in Russia. It even fired a British long-range missile as well. So Russia sees this as a grave escalation, a grave provocation, and Russia has even revised its nuclear doctrine. It has even stated that if a nuclear-armed state is enabling long-range strikes through Ukraine by supplying them with these strategic weapons, then Russia will not hesitate to retaliate against them as well. So in this context, after Ukraine used these long-range missiles, Russia retaliated with the first ever intermediate range hypersonic missile that was fired, which is the Oreshnik. Now please make a note of Oreshnik. It made the entire world sit up and take notice of the capabilities of Russia, because it is not just any ordinary hypersonic missile. It travels at a speed of Mach 10, meaning it can travel at speeds of more than 10 times the speed of sound, which makes it almost impossible to intercept. And more importantly, if you have seen those videos, the visuals, which is available on social media, where Russia launched this intermediate range missile, it employs MIRV technology. MIRV stands for Multiple Independently Targetable Re-entry Vehicles. So using just one missile, multiple warheads can be sent towards different targets, and they can all be individually released and maneuvered towards their targets. So this hypersonic missile not only has tremendous speed, but it has MIRV capabilities, carrying up to 6 warheads which are independently released and maneuvered to strike at different targets. So that is what you need to know about the Oreshnik hypersonic intermediate range missile of Russia. On this note, I bring my discussion to an end. So I hope the detailed analysis has been helpful, and I hope you have understood everything. Now, if you want the PDF of this session, please join my Telegram channel, scan the QR code, and in some time I'll share the PDF. And also join the official Telegram channel of Unacademy IAS English. The link is provided in the video description. I'm asking you to join because after the session, we'll conduct a daily quiz on these topics that we have discussed. So that will help you practice MCQs and cover these articles and revise them. So do ensure you join our official Telegram channel of Unacademy IAS English. The link is in the description. So that is it for today. If you have liked the session, do press the like button. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching.